So over the last few Sundays that we've gathered here, we've been in a series that we're calling This is Church. And we've been taking a moment, if you like, to zoom in on sort of like what characterizes what we believe church is. And that kind of comes from this conviction that church, isn't a building. It's not a particular place or an event that we go to, but actually church is this kind of living, breathing organism. Church is us. It's the people. The New Testament word, ecclesia, is really, it literally means the called out ones. And so we are the church. Yeah, the church isn't a thing or something that we do, but actually we, the people, are the church. And I guess as we've been doing this series and we've kind of looking at these characteristics, I guess in some ways we've kind of inadvertently been saying, well, if these are the things that characterize the church, then actually they're things that we want to characterize us. Yeah, as we dream and imagine the kind of church that we want to be, as we continue to dig those foundations and lay the foundations for all that we hope is ahead of us, we're kind of painting a picture of like, these are the things that we hope would characterize us as a community. And so we could have chose any number of things, but we've just been looking at four different things. The first two we've already done. And so a few weeks ago now, we talked about being a worshipping church. Or we did that, a couple of weeks ago. And then a couple of weeks before that, we talked about being a generous church. That we want to be a generous people. And so this week, as we continue this theme, I want to talk about a church that has this culture, if you like, of invitation. A culture of invitation. So before we open up the scriptures this morning, I've got a question for you to consider. A question to consider. When you think about church, is the church meant to be welcoming or inviting? Is the church, it's a rhetorical question, don't shout out. Is the church to be welcoming or inviting? Now, many of us, I would guess, would lean towards this idea of the church being this welcoming place. That the church is meant to be intentional as it possibly can be in welcoming other people. Creating environments where people can feel at home. And, I would agree. I would agree that is something that is really important, that we want to work really hard to be a welcoming people. And so we want to create environments, don't we? We want to create spaces where people have a positive experience. Because in many ways, church is kind of weird, isn't it? Church is kind of a strange thing. If you think about it, think about some of the things that have already happened this morning. You walk into a school hall and there's this kind of peculiar bunch of people who would never interact with one another in any other context. Just a complete mishmash of people. And then you arrive in this room and you're invited to take your seat. And then this strangest thing that ever happens, I don't think it happens anywhere else in culture. We stand up and we do group karaoke. We're just kind of like, we all sing to a wall or a screen. It's kind of strange, isn't it? I can't think of anywhere else in our culture other than karaoke where that happens. And then eventually, we get to the end of that, and then someone like me gets up and opens up this really old, ancient book, which is actually on my iPad this morning, but this old, ancient book that has lots of funny names and lots of funny places and makes all sorts of audacious claims about life and meaning and all that it means. And then we begin to teach. You hear this kind of monologue from this person. And then at the end of the monologue, everybody stands up and we pray. And for some reason, it has this effect on people, either physically or emotionally, or they're moved in some way. And so when you think about that, if you were like an alien transported into this environment this morning and all of that happened as I've described, it would be kind of weird, wouldn't it? Because church is kind of weird. That's what church is like. And you know, sometimes we have this tendency to think, you know, maybe we should just dial it down. Maybe we should make church really, you know, kind of palatable to as many people as we possibly can, because we want to be a welcoming place. We want to create space for people to feel welcome. But I would argue is that we can be who we are and still be a welcoming environment. I think what our responsibility is to not apologize for the church being church and the church being weird. We can lean into that. But I think it's helpful for us to at least give people the cues. You know, one of the things you might have noticed that we do a lot of here is that we like to give commentary on what's going on. Not because you're all silly and you don't know what's happening, but because there's a person in the room who thinks, I've got no clue what's going on now. What's happening? And so we just take this moment and say, hey guys, this is what's going to happen now, or this is how the service is going to run, or that person who's kind of like physically being moved right now, that's nothing to be scared of. That's just the Holy Spirit. And you know, it's a bit like going and sticking your fingers in an outlet. You know, it would have an effect. And that's all we're doing. We're getting in touch with a real God, and it affects our bodies. And so we try and explain these things. It's a bit like, you know, if you had a friend from America come to you to watch the cricket. I understand cricket's quite significant at the moment. I've got no clue. But you had an American friend come and watch cricket. And you wouldn't take your American friend to a cricket match and expect them to change the rules to baseball so he understood what was going on. You wouldn't do that, would you? But what you would do as a good friend, and you'd have to do it for me as well, you would explain what is happening as you watch the cricket match. And I think that's a better way to posture ourselves as a welcoming environment. I don't think we have to dial down. I don't think we have to pretend that we're something else. And so, but I think the challenge is this: in our quest to being welcoming, that we, you know, to become this place that we want people to feel at home at. That sometimes we can do that at the expense of invitation. And so what we can do is we can do our very best, and I've seen churches do this, do our very best at being a welcoming environment, dialing down, making everything nice and safe, but end up having actually no one to welcome, because we push the pedal of welcome, but we don't push the pedal of invitation. And so we end up putting the cart before the horse. You see, when we put this strong emphasis on being welcoming, we can inadvertently become passive. And we can kind of become like Kevin Costner. You know, if we build it, they will come. You know, if we just create the right environments, people will come. And guess what? They're not going to. And so just having all our ducks in the row, having nice coffee and doing all the right things isn't going to work. But you see, the investment of welcome is pointless if no one comes. So being welcoming is really important, and we want to do our very best at being a welcoming environment. But if you like, the other side of the coin is a culture of invitation. And in many ways, these two things go together. And so by talking about a culture of invitation, we're talking about that in addition of the fact that we want to be a welcoming church. And so I want to be super practical this morning. We're going to look at a couple of verses of Scripture in a moment. And I want to address three questions. First question, what are we inviting people to? The second question, why don't we invite? And the third question, who do we invite and where do we go from here? So if you've got a Bible, why don't you turn to John chapter 1. Just to give us a little bit of context to what is going on here. John starts the Gospel of John reminding us of who Jesus is. He's God incarnate. He's God in the flesh. He's God who's come down in human form to be amongst us. And then we read about this other figure, John the Baptist. And John the Baptist is this guy in the wilderness called to prepare the way for the Messiah, the one who's being sent, who's been chosen by God to save humankind. And we see John testifies this about Jesus. He says, look, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. And so this is where we're jumping in at verse 37, and how various people, including some of John's disciples, I would be a little bit gutted if I was John. You know, I've got my disciples, and then Jesus comes along, and I've got no disciples. But the disciples are responding to what Jesus is saying in this moment. And so it says this, verse 37, when the two disciples heard him saying this, that's Jesus, they followed Jesus. Turning around, Jesus saw them following and asked, what do you want? They said, Rabbi, which means teacher, where are you staying? Come, he replied, and you will see. So they went and saw where he was staying, and they spent that day with him. It was about 4 p.m. Don't you love that the Bible sometimes gives you irrelevant detail? You know, just like it was 4 o'clock. Okay, fine. Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, was one of the two who had heard what John had said and who had followed Jesus. The first thing Andrew did was to find his brother Simon and tell him, we have found the Messiah, that is the Christ. And he brought him to Jesus. Jesus looked at him and said, you are Simon, son of John. You will be called Cephas, which translated is Peter. The next day, Jesus decided to leave Galilee. Finding Philip, he said to him, follow me. Philip, like Andrew and Peter, was from the town of Bethsaida. And Philip found Nathanael and told him, we have found the one Moses wrote about in the law, and about whom the prophet also wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph. Nazareth, can anything good come from there? Nathanael asked. Come and see, said Philip. When Jesus saw Nathanael approaching, he said to them, here truly is an Israelite in whom there is no deceit. How do you know me? Nathanael asked. Jesus answered, I saw you while you were still under a fig tree, before Philip called you. Then Nathanael declared, Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel. So this is an interesting passage, isn't it? It's primarily an account of Jesus recruiting his very first disciples. But it kind of documents this interesting series of events. First of all, we have this guy called Andrew. Now, Andrew had been following John, as we said, but suddenly he gets this revelation of who Jesus is. And he kind of invites himself to follow Jesus. He invites himself to become Jesus' disciple. Now, my sense is that Andrew was a fairly confident guy, maybe an extrovert, high E on the Myers-Briggs. And he literally takes this invitation on himself to follow Jesus. And we all know people like that, don't we? People who have this ability to fit in wherever they find themselves. And to attach themselves to people, not in a kind of stalkery way, but just like in a normal way, people who have that ability. And so as a result of him making this invitation to himself to follow Jesus, and having this personal encounter with him, he goes and grabs his brother. And he says, Simon, you need to come. You need to come and meet this guy, Jesus. He's the one that we've been waiting for. And then we see Jesus calls Philip. And he personally invites him to follow him. And then, like Andrew, he runs to his friend, Nathaniel. Now, Nathaniel is a little bit more of a cynic, I would say. A little bit more cynical. Anybody know any cynical people? Don't look at the person next to you, but we all know what cynical people are like. And so when Nathaniel hears that Jesus, hears about this Jesus, and he finds out he's from Nazareth, he's a little bit full of contempt, isn't he? He's like, Nazareth? Can anything good come from Nazareth? It's a bit like, saying, come and meet my friend who's from Luton. Can anything good come from Luton? And so there's this kind of thing taking place. And so we see in Nathaniel he's kind of resistant to who Jesus is. And so as Nathaniel approached Jesus, then we see that actually Jesus has this kind of prophetic word for him, doesn't he? He says, I've seen you already. I know who you are. I know you by name. I've seen where you were standing. And Jesus reveals this to him. And so what we see in this passage, I want to suggest, is this fairly odd series of events that kind of highlight a culture of invitation, what it means to be invitational. And so what can we learn from this passage? What can we learn? And by going back to those three questions. What are we inviting people to? You see, the temptation when you hear someone like me talk about invitation is that you think we're talking about inviting someone to an event. Maybe an event like church or small group or some sort of social gathering, whatever it might be. We think, invitation, I'm going to take them along to this. And of course, that's part of what invitation is. But actually, invitation is far more than that. As we read this passage, we don't see any of these people inviting someone to a church service, do we? These first disciples didn't have an event to take people to. They invited people to encounter Jesus. They invited people to encounter him. And so in building a culture of invitation, it's really important that we understand that our invitation is to Jesus. Yeah, we're inviting people to him. Andrew's like, Simon, you've got to come and see this guy. You're not going to believe it. He's the one that we learned about at school, when we were studying the Torah. When God said he was going to make a promise. He's arrived. He's here. And then there's Philip. He gets this great line. This great line is, come and see. Come and see. You see, the invitation is never really to an event. It's never really to a church service. The invitation is always to Jesus. Now, you might be saying, will you come with me to this? That might be the words that you say. Or, hey, we've got this thing called Alpha. Or whatever it might be. But ultimately, what we're saying is, come and see. Come and see. Come and meet this person, Jesus, who's completely transformed my life. And I think he can transform your life as well. And that should be really natural for us. Those of us who have encountered Jesus in any significant way should find that natural to really say that to other people. Because the reality is it's easy, isn't it, to talk about and invite people to something or to someone that we are in love with and passionate about ourselves. And we all do this. We all do this. Think about the last time you had a really good meal somewhere. I mean really good, that it was worthy of a Facebook status update. You know, I mean, how many of us have eaten this great meal or had this great experience or visited a great city, but then found it really hard to tell someone about it? We don't do that, do we? We know what it's like to share good things. We don't find that hard because it's really natural. It kind of just flows out of us. The things that we love, the things that we're passionate about, the encounters that we have that are positive, we can't help but share and invite others into. How much more should we be able to do that with this person that we've encountered called Jesus Christ? How much more should we be able to invite others to him? So we're inviting people to a person. We're inviting people to Jesus. So why do we find it so hard? Why do we find it so hard? Why don't you turn to the person next to you and give them one reason why you think we find invitation so difficult? On your marks, get set, go. So I'm guessing there could be a number of reasons, but my guess, the root for most of us would be fear of rejection. Now, those who have done some study on this, so I'm taking their word for it, have discovered that 80 to 95% of Christians, you know, those who would say they follow Jesus, when asked about this subject, said they had no intention of inviting anyone to anything. 80 to 95%. That means for every 10 people in this room, 9.5 of you would not invite anyone to anything. 9.5 of you. And primary, that statistic is motivated by fear. It's motivated by fear. It might be weird. Remember what we said at the beginning? Church is weird. Other people might put them off. You know, you've got to trust everyone else in the room because they could do something to your friend who you love that you're not comfortable with. Or thirdly, it could ruin your relationship. It could ruin your relationship. All our reasons are rooted in fear. Now, did Jesus have something to say about fear? Wasn't he the one who said something like, "Do not be afraid"? So my guess is that if Jesus said, "Don't be afraid," do you think there may be moments in our lives that cause us to feel fearful? And you see, I think we've created such a risk-averse version of Christianity that it leaves us completely inept. Now, I'm not saying any of those fears aren't real. Of course they are. And we've all experienced them at different times, I'm sure. And so an element of fear is there. You know, we're going to have an element of fear. But something bigger than fear for all of us is this idea of rejection. Yeah, so we have this fear, the impact it would have, but we also worry about rejection. Now, is there anyone in the scriptures who faced rejection? Wasn't a trick question, but you know, only the founder and perfecter of our faith. Okay? Jesus was rejected. He was rejected by his own family. You know, at one stage they tried, you know, the town where he grew up in, they tried to push him off a cliff. He was rejected by his closest friends, even at the very end. Now, if Jesus was rejected and we are his followers, is there a slight chance as his followers we might face rejection sometimes? Is there a chance of that? What am I trying to say? I'm trying to say this. We don't invite people to Jesus because we fear rejection. And the thing is, that's partly kind of the deal. It's part of the deal. It's normal. It's to be expected. It kind of comes with the territory. The problem is we live in a culture that's driven by success. If we don't get the result we want or the response that we long for, I'm never going to try that again. I'm not going to do that again. That's no way that's going to happen. But, what if, when it comes to being a person of invitation, we were to see success differently? Because I think for many of us, we think success means, I invited this person, they came, they fell to their knees in repentance the week after they were baptized, and they became these passionate followers of Jesus. And we think that's where success lies. But what if we began to define success differently? What if success was simply one person inviting another person? Now notice, I didn't say, what if success is one person inviting another person and they say yes? Because the yes part belongs to God. The yes belongs to God. As the Apostle Paul says in 1 Corinthians, I plant the seed, Apollos watered it, but God makes it grow. God makes it grow. You see, we're driven by the wrong idea of success. We're driven by this idea that success is all on us. We've got to make it happen. But the yes of any invitation is God's part of the deal. He's the one. Our job is to plant seeds, have a few God conversations, and then water them. Maybe put an invitation out there, here and there. But the yes, the response, belongs to God. And the success for us in building a culture of invitation, being a people or invitational, is simply one person inviting another person. That has to be our win. That has to be the win. We have to leave the yes part to God. And so the last part of my question was, who do we invite and where do we go from here? Well, as we think about being invitational, we often encounter lots of people in different places, don't we? Who respond in different ways. We see it in this passage as we read that, some received an invitation in that passage and responded immediately. Others were a little bit like, I don't know. He lives in Luton. I don't know if that's possible. So others are a little bit more questioning. But the reality is God is often at work in people's lives long before you and I show up. Look at Nathanael. God already saw him. Jesus already saw him. And so when he goes and finds him and he's a little bit cynical and a little bit reluctant, Jesus says, you know what? I saw you. I know who you are. And so Jesus is at work in this person's life long before anyone else shows up. And so as we attempt to be invitational, a helpful way to picture this is to think about a clock. So some people we meet are at 12 o'clock in their relationship with God. Whatever you say to them, they will respond by saying yes. Okay? You may have encountered someone like that. They're at 12 o'clock in their relationship with God. You can even try and put them off, if you like, and they still say yes. Why? Because God has already been at work in their lives long before you get there. Other people that you encounter are at 3 o'clock in their relationship with God. And often our encounter with 3 o'clock people is horrendous. Okay? You may say, would you like to come with me? And you'll make them really angry. Have you ever encountered people like that? You make them really angry. But as horrendous as that encounter might be, we have just been part of that person's ongoing conversation with God. Now, there are some people who are at 6 o'clock in their relationship with God. And you will invite them and they will say something like, you know what, I've been thinking about this a lot and I have some thoughts about it, but actually you Christians are a bunch of hypocrites. There's no way I would come and be involved in anything like that. And just like the 3 o'clock person, they're just at 6 o'clock in their relationship with God. And that's where they are. And we have just been part of their ongoing conversation with God. Some people we invite will be at 9 o'clock. And you'll invite them and they'll say, you know, when is it? Or what do I need to do? Or what time is it? And, you know, there's donuts, there's coffee. And you say all those things. And their response is, I'm busy. I'm busy. They're not anti the invitation. They're not offended. They're just busy. They're at 9 o'clock in their relationship with God. Some people are at 11 o'clock in their relationship with God. And when you meet them, they are so close. They're so close. And you might say something like, they might say something like, I'm not quite ready, but would you invite me again sometime? I've had a few people in my life like that. We lived on the same street for like, I don't know, 11, 12 years. And one of our neighbours, you know, I invited him to everything. You know, he was a bit of a geezer and I'm sure he smoked pot. But he was one of those people, so close, you know, and will you invite me again? I can't make it this time, but would you invite me again? And you see, as we go about inviting people, we will meet people in different places on that clock face. And that's simply where they are. And as we invite them, we do our very best. Even if the answer is no, we are moving them along that clock face. We're moving them along. And so here's the thing. When we look at it this way, we start to understand that no invitation is wasted. No invitation is failure. Let's illustrate it this way. I've got another cricket analogy. And it makes it sound like I understand cricket, but I still don't understand. Maybe someone can explain it to me. Anybody know who this guy is? Shane Warne. And sadly, he passed away, didn't he, last year, I think. But it's also interesting to note that in his test match career, he took 716 test match wickets, making him the most successful Australian test match bowler. I don't know if that still stands true, anyone who's into cricket. But it's also interesting to note that in his career, he actually bowled 40,000 balls. That means 39,284 balls he bowled failed. But despite this, he's still considered one of the best wicket takers that Australia ever had. In his career, he took a wicket every 55 bowls. But no one would say he was a failed cricketer. Everyone knew he was playing a game and he was setting a game up. Now, I'm not suggesting that for every 55 people you invite, you're going to get a yes. But think about it. I'm not an expert in maths, but I reckon the more seed we sow, the more chance of a yes we might get. Can you imagine if, Jesus told the story of the parable of the sower, and he talks about a farmer that went out to sow his seed, and some of the seed landed on the path, so he packed his bags and went home. That isn't the story that Jesus says, is it? He says this farmer carried on sowing. Some seed landed on the path, some in the rocky places, some amongst the thorns, and some in good soil. Maybe some of us haven't received a yes because we haven't sowed enough seed. As I said, it's not everyone we invite will say yes. Some are at different places on that clock face, and that's okay. But what if every adult connected to this, what we're doing right now, were to plant 5 seeds of invitation? What would that look like? Well, that would mean about 200 people would receive a personal invite in some way. And what if, 10% of those people responded? That would mean 20 of our collective friends, neighbours, work colleagues, whatever it might be, have the opportunity to encounter Jesus. Simply because you and I chose to be invitational. Simply because you and I said, you know what, I'm really scared and I'm worried that this person's going to reject me, but I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to have a go anyway. I'm going to be invitational. Can we choose to be like Philip, who said, come and see? Would you just come and see? Would you come with me? Would you come and see with me who this person Jesus is? Now you might think, well, but what am I inviting people to, Steve? Well, not a lot. We don't have a lot, do we? We're a baby church. We're a church that's just getting off the ground. We're grateful for every breathing human being that ever walks in. And we count pets as members, and so we're grateful for all of that. So what am I inviting people to? Well, here's the thing. You have 100% permission to invite people to anything we do, okay? Our promise to you is that it might be weird, and there might be moments where you think, this is awkward, but we will do our very best to make sure, if you're brave enough to invite, that we will do our very best to make people feel at home. And so you can invite people here, you can invite people to church around the table on the first Sunday of the month, you can invite people to a city group. You are free, you have full permission to invite people into anything, into any environment. And then, one of the ways we could exercise our invitational muscle, and it'd be really easy, is this summer. So I said we're going to talk a little bit about what the next few weeks are going to look like. But this summer, we're going to change our rhythm as a church. And whilst we recognize that people disappear on holiday at different points, we've just got a few different things that are going to be happening on Sundays that are highly relational and, kind of easy invites, easy invitations. And so on the 6th, we've got a canal walk, and we're probably going to end somewhere at a pub or something like that. On the 13th, Jordan and Terry are hosting a picnic and games. And then on the 20th, Michael and Dawn are hosting a barbecue. And these are just moments where we get to be together, but we also get to be invitational. And so maybe one of those events could be a space where you buck up the courage and say, you know what? Would you come with me? I've got these weird group of friends, and you'll probably question why I know them and all of those things. But maybe one of those environments would be an invitational space that you could use this summer. And whatever the outcome, if we're sitting having a barbecue and we've all got to have 3 burgers because no one turned up, I'm okay with that. But you know what I mean? It's like we want to celebrate the success, and the success is one person inviting another person. It's not the yes, okay? Now we'll celebrate the yes, of course, if someone was to step into that place and encounter more of Jesus and get closer to him. But it's one person inviting another person. And we want that to be our culture, don't we? We want that to be the kind of church community we are. A place of invitation. A place that welcomes people to come and encounter more of Jesus.